Welcome to the Wellbeing Uprising. I'm your host, Bethany Ainsley. In today's episode, we're opening the conversation on neurodiversity in the workplace, a subject that's often misunderstood, yet vitally important. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and dyspraxia, neurodiversity reminds us that we all think and work differently.
I think a lot of people are worried because of the stigma, especially for certain neurotypes have more stigma attached than others.
Our guests today bring both expertise and lived experience. First is Rosie Brighty, who combines personal neurodivergent insight with academic and training expertise through her work at Divergent Consulting.
If you lived in an environment that was designed around your brain, you wouldn't be disabled at all. It's because we're living in this society that isn't designed around our brains.
Helen Easton, who leads people and culture at Darlington Building Society, is shaping inclusive strategies that support employees across the organisation.
We have had a few colleagues come forward who have had recent diagnosis or are awaiting diagnosis. And that's really helpful for us because then we know how we can help them.
Together we'll explore what neurodiversity really means, how workplaces can get the best from everyone, and what both individuals and employers can do to make inclusion a reality. It's Rosie. What does neurodiversity mean to you, and why is it so important that we define it properly?
So neurodiversity is basically, it's just the natural variation in the brains in the whole world. Everyone's brain's different, and neurodiversity covers everything. Someone who's neurodivergent basically is different from the norm. So I always like to compare it to, like if you think of it, I've got this image, it's the image on the background of my website, and it's this beautiful rainforest, and you kind of got and like the middle level, you've got a load of trees, and then you've got towering above them some taller trees, you've got fewer taller trees, and then obviously you can't see it in the picture, but you'd also have some lower shrubs down at the bottom. These taller and smaller trees, they would be the biodivergent trees. They're not better, they're not worse, they're just different. But because we've got these differences in that habitat, it's a richer environment, more animals can live there, it's better off for that. So that is why I think that it's so important to understand neurodiversity, because we will be better as a society, the individuals will be better when we're working together and understand everyone's got different brains.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I read somewhere that 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent. Does that sound right?
No, so that was an old figure. So when I started 3 years ago, that was the figure I was using. Now we're down to 1 in 5, or up to 1 in 5, I guess, which I still don't think is high enough. I still think there's more than that. But we've all just been living in this life designed for the neurotypical brain, and so everyone's just been hiding it. So I think there's a lot more people who are now learning about themselves.
Yeah. And you've been quite open about your own experience. Are you happy to share a bit more about that?
So I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic and ADHD. And when I was in school, kind of didn't, just ignored it, like got detention, talked my way out of them a lot, that kind of thing. It wasn't until I was in university that I got my diagnosis of dyslexia and dyspraxia, but it took me a full 10 years to actually accept that diagnosis. Like I took the extra time in exams and I was just like, great, I'll just crack on with this, but fully ignored it. Failed 10 driving tests. And it wasn't until I went on a 10th driving test, crying my eyes out, going, what's wrong with me? Like everyone can drive. I had to resit my, practical 3 times because it kept just running out. And my sister was like, so my sister's a psychologist. She said, there's nothing wrong with you, but you are dyslexic and dyspraxic. You do have trouble with sequencing, driving sequences that are always the same. You do have trouble with coordination. Why don't you do your test again in an automatic? And just by removing that step of having to think of which gear I'm in, I then passed my test in the automatic first time. And it was not till then, which was 10 years after my initial diagnosis, that I started to go, oh, actually, there's something in this. I am different. My brain does work differently to other people. And then I started to work with it rather than against it. Just that little accommodation of removing that gear stick meant that I could get to A to B, from A to B, just like everybody else. And so then I stopped trying to just power through and ignore and just pretend I was like everybody else and just do things in the same way as them, and then started to work with my brain. So after university, I went into teaching did a focus on special educational needs, which is often neurodiversity, and just because I was interested in it, no other reason. That was too much for me. Ended up going blind in the classroom, just really intense. Then I went into engineering, and you're seeing a bit of an ADHD CV here. When I was an engineer, I was struggling with something. I was really good at some of the project work. So there's a part that's broken here, and looking at it and seeing the fracture patterns and why is it broken, talking to the shop floor, suppliers, all those kind of things, the things that are making the company money. I was brilliant at. But there was a little activity we had to do, just an hour of every day, and I was shocking at it. It involved part numbers that all looked the same to me. It involved systems. And basically my boss pulled me in. Why are you still struggling with this? I said, well, I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic. We'll get there. It's going to take me longer. And he then said to me, oh, you probably shouldn't be in this team then. And I took that and ran with it. And I was like, I shouldn't be in this team. Remove the probably, shouldn't be in the team. And basically I spiraled. I don't think that was his fault. That was definitely my response to it. It wasn't until I was away from that environment with my son on maternity leave that I had the chance to reflect and go, hang on, I've got academic understanding, I'm a teacher, I've been in private and public sector, I'm actually in a position to do something about this. So I started my consultancy. I do the training and consulting, and I've got psychologists that do workplace needs assessments and coaching. And then I got my ADHD diagnosis as well, just to kind of complete my little bingo sheet. And then when I went back, after my to complete my maternity, in the same company, my different boss said to me, I disclosed straight away, and he said, "Oh, excuse my ignorance, but how does that look to you?" So fantastic, amazing response, and the response that I encourage people to use.
So that brings me nicely on to Helen. Why do you think that embracing neurodiversity is a business priority and not just a nice to have?
Well, I think as Rosie's quite clearly explained, society is different. Everyone in society is different. And, as an employer, we employ people from all walks of life. Our members, we're a building society, we're there to serve our members. Mm-hmm. So as an employer, it's important that we understand every one of our colleagues and what their individual needs are. We can then make their workplace, more embracing for them to be able to give of their best and contribute equally. It's really important to us that, as a society, we recognise that. I've worked with some of our colleagues on new systems that we've implemented to make sure that they work for them. Across various different, levels of diversity. On neurodiversity, we have within the society colleagues, and it's their feedback that makes us be better at what we do. Yeah,
and it's so important as well, as Rosie mentioned, if we're talking about 1 in 5 people, how many people is that in a workforce? For any business, over 5 people, there's going to be at least one, if we're looking at those statistics, isn't it? In terms of Darlington Building Society, how do you approach creating an inclusive environment?
So we've recently been through an employer's accreditation with the Northeast Autism Society, and we've had a lot of education across all members of our teams. So from our board right the way through to Saturday colleagues, we've trained everybody in their level of neurodiversity training so that we can understand each other and be more accepting of each other's differences and work with those differences rather than against them. So I think it has helped in certain cases where we've managed to alleviate any workplace arguments or differences. It's definitely helped us to understand each other better and be more cohesive in what we do, but actually play to people's strengths, because different levels of neurodiversity, as Rosie said, have got different skills that we need in the society.
Yeah, definitely. It just makes sense, doesn't it, to build to people's strengths. Rosie, have you noticed when businesses don't look at this, what are the problems or pitfalls?
So when people aren't looking at it, people are hiding themselves and they're masking and they're not showing their strengths. That's leading to increased staff turnover. It's leading to higher presenteeism and absenteeism. And in my case, I left an entire two different workforces. So I left teaching and engineering, and that's happening over and over. A lot of neurodivergent people go self-employed because they can't cope with having an employer, whereas employees that embrace that get the exact opposite.
From a business sense, what are the common misconceptions around addressing neurodiversity in the workplace, if any?
I think some of the misconceptions are that people are being discriminated against, and sometimes it's positive discrimination because you want people with a certain level of neurodiversity to be in your business because they have skills that can enhance your business. So, there are some positives, but generally the misconceptions are that if you call it out because you want to help someone, that you're actually discriminating against them. And in our case, we would like to know, because that's how we can enable any of our employee benefits, our EUP, to be able to support our colleagues rather than, that being a discriminatory, just to seek to understand them. So we can be a better employer.
Yeah. And do you think a lot of it comes down to culture? So if an individual feels comfortable coming forward and saying, I've had a ADHD diagnosis, or I think I might be dyslexic, do you think that comes down to culture and the confidence around the team that would support the individual?
Absolutely. So over and above individual accommodations, it's been found on so many different surveys and things that companies where the culture is inclusive, even when they don't have as many individual accommodations, the person feels more accepted and able to do a good job. So actually working on an individual basis is sometimes necessary, but getting a whole company culture is the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the hard part of, but that's why, what we did in Darlington was we made sure that the level of understanding we had went from our board right the way through every level within the society. So they all had a greater understanding, and that is part of our culture.
It's really good. Would you say that's forward thinking, Rosie, in terms?
Absolutely. Yeah. So just in terms of protecting yourself, the amount of tribunal claims in the last year have gone up 40% in the area of discrimination, and they're finding increases to do with neurodiversity as well. So in terms of protecting yourself, absolutely forward thinking to get everyone educated and help with your culture. But then in terms of being being the employer of choice, there's a lot of people that want good employees, and you're not going to go somewhere where it's a really closed off culture, and that's getting more and more well known, especially with the new generations coming in expecting a more of a balanced life.
Yeah, we want our colleagues to be representative of the communities that we serve. So, the diversity inside the society should reflect the diversity outside of the society. And that's really important.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I imagine that'll reflect through customer service as well. Yeah. So if your team has an awareness around neurodiversity and they come across a customer who might be neurodiverse, do you think they're able to pick up on that quite quickly?
Yeah, we've made sure that that's the level of training that they've had. We have quiet space within in each branch. We have quiet hours within each branch. We have fidget toys for people who need something to hold on to. We're in the throes of producing some videos so people can see what an experience walking into the branch and having that level of service would look like. So we are covering quite a lot of aspects to make the public feel at home. But as an employer, we're looking to do that with our recruitment practice as well. So, yeah.
That's really good. And I think it's interesting as well when you talk about walking into the branch, which for some banks isn't even possible at all, is it? Does that cause problems, do you think, Rosie?
In what sense?
In sense of being able to have face-to-face support in some services as well.
Absolutely. I think for some people, it's preferable to not have the face-to-face support, but for other people, they need that anchoring in somebody, and they need to feel like sometimes we can, a lot of us struggle with rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and interacting with systems you don't understand can trigger that. I'm so stupid, what am I doing? Whereas just having a branch to go into that's friendly, that's really valuable for some people.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that actually applies to so many industries. So even though we're talking about employees at the moment, it actually will ultimately reflect in terms of how customers are treated as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's all stakeholders. It's 1 in 5 of everybody. And when you think about that, it's not just your staff, it's everybody you're interacting with. We need to get it right.
Yeah. What about individuals as well? Are there any misconceptions around the individual themselves? So, for example, if somebody hasn't had a diagnosis and they might be concerned around getting a diagnosis, where do you think those concerns might come from?
So in terms of not having a diagnosis, in the workplace, you still equally have the right to be protected, and the Equality Act stands just as much. But in terms of seeking the diagnosis, I think a lot of people are worried because of the stigma, especially for certain neurotypes have more stigma attached than others. And again, that's where I think getting involved in just other people that are the same as you reduces that stigma, and then you can go from there.
Yeah. Have you seen, in any of the businesses that you've worked in, have you seen individuals being worried about the stigma behind it?
Oh, absolutely. I know someone who she is basically in our HR in a construction in the construction industry, and she believes that there's quite a few neurodivergent people in the company. She herself is ADHD, and she knows that if she would come forward and be open about that it would help her employees. But she's still, because it's such a old school industry, she still hasn't come forward, even though she knows it would be helpful for her and others, because she's just worried about what could happen. And at least it's better the devil you know. She knows what she's doing now, even though she's struggling in secret and having breakdowns and things. She's hiding it. So yeah.
So you must see real challenges with people's mental health if they're not, if this isn't properly addressed.
Yeah, really a lot. So even if it is addressed, so you get a lot of people that find out something about themselves, say they found out they're autistic and they didn't know, and they're 45 now, and they look back and their whole lives, they think, oh, what would have been different? That would have been different. And then they're grieving for the past, they're happy for the future, but then they don't really know who they are. They have to untangle all of this, and at the same time, they have to work out the stigma they've attached to it and people around them. So there's a lot of crossover with mental health support, and going with a proper clinician that understands that and supports you through that, it makes such a difference to people's diagnosis process.
Yeah, I'd agree. We've had, so we have a wellbeing forum made up of our colleagues, and we discuss, an awful lot of these things in that wellbeing forum, but their mental health is really important to us. And so we have an EAP that supports them, but we also have specialist counsellors and specialist coaching that if, people need something more specific for them, then that's something that we look at. But, from an absenteeism, to get that right, it really does reduce if you can work with people and helping them to understand how they can still contribute. So I've got a colleague who is my go-to person from a systems point of view. We're just implementing a new HR system at the moment, and our previous system was perhaps too complex for her needs. So we made some adjustments for her as to how she would, complete the requirements through the HR system. So now we're busy setting the new systems up. We're taking all of that feedback and using some of our neurodivergent employees, their skills as to what works for them, so we can accommodate everybody. Yeah.
That's great, isn't it? And again, playing to people's strengths to bring out the best of the team. Yeah. There are problems around diagnosis, aren't there, in terms of waiting lists?
It's like 7 years, 9 years in some places, and that's just not acceptable. I went private because I couldn't wait that long, but I know that that's a very privileged position to come from. But then there's a lot of people that they're certain that they are ADHD, for example, but because they're waiting for this diagnosis, they just go, well, I think I am. And it takes them a decade to get that validation that they've always known themselves, but they're not quite confident to get across. So screening can really help. It's not exactly the same as diagnosis, but it gives people that kind of level of, at least somebody's told me that I'm not making it up.
I'm interested to know if, since you started doing more work around this at Darlington Building Society, have more people come forward in terms of wanting a diagnosis?
Yes, it's a simple answer. We have had a few colleagues come forward who have had recent diagnosis or are awaiting diagnosis. And that's really helpful for us because then we know how we can help them. I think when people keep it to themselves and don't share openly, and we're that safe environment in Darlington where people can share, that's part of our culture. We embrace people's differences, but it's how can we work with them? And I think, the more you know as an employer, the more you can accommodate people and what their needs are. And, we're around about a 200 headcount and, we have 200 different individuals and every one of them will have different needs. Not all of them as much as others, but if we don't know about it, we can't accommodate it. So it's important that from a wellbeing perspective that, we understand as much about our colleagues as we possibly can. So for me, for them to share, it's really important. But for me to create the safe space for them to share is also equally important.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant that you've been able to create that safe space. Do you think part of it is around awareness as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think, that 2-3 years ago, there was an awful lot of noise, probably where we sort of first came into contact with each other, and the movement's just continued on from there, and it's grown massively, and so it should. Like we said before, this is all of society. We're all different, and we all contribute. So yeah,
yeah, definitely.
For smaller businesses, I think it's even more important to get right because each individual can have such an impact on the company, and getting them play into their strengths is amazing. Bigger companies have often got a lot of red tape and things to jump over. I mean, big companies tend to be advantaged because they've got a lot more money to put on these things. But the smaller companies are in a really great position where they can be a bit more flexible. They've got time to speak with individuals and understand. So I'd say it's not just about neurodiversity. All diversity. If you can have an open and inclusive culture in terms of neurodiversity, everything else just falls into place because if you can have a flexible society where everyone can get their needs met or at least communicate them, then that's going to make your small business or your big business do better.
Well, that's the thing as well, because I mentioned 1 in 7, you mentioned 1 in 5. Do you think that's going to continue to increase?
I would expect
yeah.
so,
yeah. Because at the end of it, everybody is different.
Yeah, everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all trying to live in this environment that isn't designed around our brains. And so part of being neurodivergent is if you lived in an environment that was designed around your brain, you wouldn't be disabled at all. It's because we're living in this society that isn't designed around our brains. But life is getting harder and harder for everyone. So I can imagine that there's going to be more and more people that are unable to hide their difficulties in these harsh environments.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Do you think the onus needs to be on the individual in terms of understanding what their needs are, or on the employer to try and figure out what their needs are?
Both. Yeah, so in the Equality Act, it's the employer should be responsible for it. In terms of even if you suspect someone is neurodivergent and they're having struggles that make life difficult compared to their neurotypical counterpart, then it's your responsibility to support them. It's not necessarily your responsibility to say, are you neurodivergent? But it is to say, oh, look, I've noticed you could do like this. How can we help? But the employees can't do that for everyone. They can't, you have to think they have to be getting on with doing what the business is doing as well as managing the people. So it has to be a two-way conversation. But that comes from culture. It comes from a company that allows the individual to speak out. Because if one individual speaks out and it doesn't go well, all the other individuals aren't going to then start speaking out themselves either. So yes, I think it's very much the business, the managers, the individuals, everybody.
I think it's really clear that culture is important, awareness is important, and then from there you can start look at what small changes can be made. How do you think the shift goes? So the mindset shift goes from looking at challenges into opportunities and strengths.
I think that comes from a lot of understanding, and if you understand where the challenges have been, and you can unpick those challenges, you can then create them into opportunities. And I think that's maybe managers' relationships, organizational and relationships, but also the person who has that level of neurodiversity, what they are prepared to share, and how, if they do have some level of understanding as how best they work, then again, unpicking all of those, you can create some massive opportunities. Like Rosie said, some simple things about where someone sits. We've got some quiet spaces that we created when we did a bit of an office redesign a couple of years ago. And just when you need to take some time out, that's the place to go. It wasn't there before. It's the same with the lights. We changed the lights to come on and off as people moved. That was too much for people, so we've put them back on. So, people can sit and move, but they know those lights aren't going to come on and off and really affect different individuals. So there's some huge opportunities, and that for me has helped a reduced labour turnover, reduced absenteeism. So all those commercial aspects from an employer's perspective, they're really positive things that we can tangibly hang our hat on to say, we've done this well.
I'm really interested in the masking side of things that you mentioned earlier. If a young child or a young person begins to mask at such an early age, will they always recognise in later like adulthood or later life that they are masking, or could it just become part of a normal habit?
Just a normal habit. Absolutely. A lot of people don't know really who they are because they've spent their entire life trying to be an acceptable version of themselves. And suddenly they go, oh, all right, I found this out about myself. Maybe I've not been being myself. Maybe I've been masking. And it's not even a case of remove your mask. It's like, what is behind the mask? And obviously for those people, my encouragement would be to do it gently and slowly. Otherwise, you'll just put a different mask on.
Yeah, we've had a couple of colleagues who've mentioned as they've had their diagnosis unfold and they're more familiar with themselves, they recognise now when they're masking. It's like, oh, I'm masking. And it's like, I don't need to. You can just be you. But they do put this, the different face on. It is just a different mask if they try not to mask. Yeah, but it's easier just to put it out in the open and try and be who you really are, rather than trying to hide, I think.
And just the effort of masking, it just means that you're not going to be as good at your job. So if it's not needed, like right now, I need to be sat still so that I can be in the chair and near the microphone. That is necessary. Usually when I'm training, I'm wandering around everywhere, and I've hit this microphone loads of times. Sorry about that. But so that is partly I am masking, but but I understand that that's necessary, so it's okay. It's when you're forced to do it when it's not necessary, and it is harder, and there's no point.
And I bet there's a big difference from somebody who has been masking to when they can just be themselves, be authentic in terms of their well-being.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of well-being, in terms of just even as simple as you sleep better. If you get a few moments to be yourself, you can sleep better. But some people won't even be themselves on their own.
Yeah, it's just like that decompression, isn't it? It's just feels like a weight's being lifted because they can be themselves. Yeah.
And obviously sleep is vital to good well-being, and that one simple thing, and then everything else just continues.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's really a really positive conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.